is a founder-led organization, and Marc and Craig Kielburger hold significant power in the organization. As I was not going to be able to discharge my oversight duties, I opted to resign immediately. In an accelerated process, the remainder of the board of directors was replaced, but for one Canadian member and 2 US board members in early April. I was not on the board at that time and therefore cannot speak to the circumstances of the replacement. Given the nature of these proceedings, I'd like to also add the following. Having resigned on March 27th, 2020, I have no knowledge whatsoever of the Canada Student Service Grant Program. I was involved in some discussions in 2018 with the board of directors that concerned an entity called the We Charity Foundation. While the entity was established in January 2018, the board was never satisfied that the operation of this foundation was in the best interests of the charity or its various stakeholders. To the best of my knowledge, it was not in operation as of my departure from the board. The We Charity board always understood that speakers were not paid by the charity or the related organization to speak at We Days. The board made direct inquiries on this issue.
You indicate that the board was told that We Charity did not pay speakers. Is that correct?
Yes.
How did they communicate?
Let me be more precise. At We Days.
At We Days. Okay. Were you under the impression that they paid speakers at other events?
Employees spoke at other events, and of course they were compensated, but
speaking fees?
No, I don't believe so.
And so to your knowledge, no one on the board was ever informed that speaking fees would be paid for outside participants to come to We events and give speeches?
At least to We Days, which was the focus of our inquiries, that was my understanding.
So were you surprised to learn that Margaret, Sophie, and Sasha Trudeau received over $300,000 in speaking fees?
I don't know the precise nature of what they were paid for, but if it was exclusively to speak on the We Days stage, that would have surprised me.
And would it have surprised you if it was to speak at any other event related to the We Charity?
I never made inquiries into that kind of an adjunct or associated area, so I just don't know about that particular aspect.
And We Chair and the Kielburgers or We Charity ever expressly communicate to the board that speakers were not paid for We Day events?
They did.
They did. Okay.
Or that may have come from the executive director of the organization, but I know the board made inquiries into that.
Who was that executive director?
It was one of two. I can't be precise on the time. It was either Scott Baker or Dalal El-Wahidi.
Thank you.
Our team worked incredibly hard to build and launch the CSSG as a national bilingual service program. The results were evident within the first week. 35,000 youth applications from every province and territory, 83 non-for-profit coalition partners, 24,000 and increasing service roles. But the program quickly got pulled into politics. We handed the built system, technology, even the call center, to the public service, hoping to save the program. We declined any reimbursement for our costs. We thought that our actions would enable the program's long-term survival, and we are deeply saddened that it did not. We also regret that the fallout has created hardship for our staff, our partners, and the communities that we serve. When Employment and Social Development Canada asked us to administer the Canada Student Service Grant, we regret that we didn't recognize how this decision would be perceived. We would never have picked up the phone when the civil service called, asking us to help young Canadians get through the pandemic if we had known the consequences, the young people would not get the help they need now, and the 25 years of We Charities programs helping millions of youth would be in jeopardy. We are most sorry for the students of Canada. We know that this pandemic has put so many in dire straits, unsure of whether they will be able to continue their education or even pay their rent. This committee heard yesterday about MPs' offices being flooded with emails and calls from students desperate for help. These students should be volunteering, serving their country, and receiving critical support for their education. We respect this process, and we are happy to participate.
National Post obtained a memo in which, Mark, you said, and I quote, "I'm thrilled to share that we have been invited by the Prime Minister and Canadian Heritage to host a unique We Day event in Ottawa on Canada Day weekend 2017. So the Justin Trudeau personally called you, or was it Craig that got the call from Justin Trudeau?
Hi, sir. I'm happy to speak to that question. It was in regards to the fact that the Prime Minister had announced $200 million in funding supporting organizations across Canada for national celebrations on Canada 150.
Right.
Heritage was the group that we engaged with. We submitted a formal proposal through Heritage.
Right.
And
that wasn't the question. That wasn't the question. The question was, did the Prime Minister personally call? Because that's the wording of the statement was that you were thrilled that we have been invited by the Prime Minister. So, and another imaginary interaction with the Prime Minister's office or with the Prime Minister himself.
Sir, if I may respond to your question, I can say with certainty that neither Mark nor I have ever in 25 years received a phone call from the Prime Minister on this any topic. In fact, when people
that's clear.
We will, Mr. Poilievre, we are going to allow the witnesses. They're here for 4 hours.
Yeah.
We will allow them to
also
answer in
on
relatively equal time. Go ahead, Mr. Craig.
I think that people, we understand the politically sensitive nature of the moment.
Yeah.
But typically when people say that Heritage Canada, the Prime Minister, in the midst of a moment on Canada's 150th anniversary, has invited you to engage, it was in relation to the fact that the Prime Minister.
Okay, Craig, did you speak to anyone in the PMO? Did you speak to anyone in the PMO on April the 23rd?
Mr. Chair.
Did you speak to anyone in the PMO on April the 23rd?
We're happy to be here for 4 hours.
Great. Answer the question then.
Sir, with great respect, we're here.
April the 23rd. Did you speak to anyone in the Prime Minister's office? Yes or no?
Or we're going to lose more time than gain more time. The question has been asked, Mr. Kielburger, if you could answer it, and I'll not take this time away from you, Pierre, but there is a little bit of trouble with your mic somehow, fellas. I don't know whether you had to speak slower or what, but it's coming through a little jumpy. So if you could answer Mr. Poilievre's question.
I'd be happy to answer any question with the appropriate time. Would you repeat your question, please?
Yes, I'll repeat it for the 5th time. Did you speak to anyone in the PMO on April 23rd? Yes or no?
No, I did not.
Thank you very much. Did Margaret Trudeau get paid for her presentation at the July 2nd, 2017 Canada 150 event?
So, yes, sir, we've checked our records. We have no record of payment for her for that event. And just to further elaborate,
thank you. That you were very clear, and I appreciate the answer. Did Sasha, Margaret, or Sophie Trudeau ever get paid to speak at a We Day event?
Gentlemen?
Sasha, Margaret, or Sophie Trudeau were paid. Yes. In fact, can I take a moment to speak to this? So we appreciate
that you did answer the question. I appreciate the answer.
We will allow them time to answer.
They answered already.
No, he asked for more time. I'm giving him more time. Mr. Kielburger.
Take it off your clock.
Happily. So we were originally asked the question in a crush of literally hundreds of media questions that we received in the context of the CSSG, which was a government-funded program. And we made the statement that We Charity had never provided funding to a member of the Trudeau family to speak at We Day. At the time, we believed that statement to be true.
Fair enough.
However, if I just may, there's a social enterprise which provided that information, and we should have, and allow me to say this candidly, should have been more forthright in acknowledging the social enterprise provided sponsorship.
Right.
When that was brought to our attention that there were errors in the billing, we acknowledged it. We acknowledged in national newspaper ads, and we apologize.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. This is not. None of this is related to my question. So I trust the chair is not taking this from my time. In addition to the speaking fees that the Trudeaus have received, what is the total amount your organizations, including we, but not limited to it, have paid in expenses, benefits, reimbursements, fees, or any other in-kind or monetary consideration for Sophie Trudeau?
Sir, happy to do that. It's part of our regular course of activities. When a speaker does come, of course, we speak to their compensation.
Sure, just the total of dollar figure, please.
We will allow the witnesses to answer how they so decide. The witnesses have the floor.
But in the normal course of business, of course, when people do come to WE-Day, we also provide them with a reimbursement for their direct costs. So the information that we have readily available, to the best of our knowledge, sir, is Sacha Trudeau or Alexander Trudeau came to 8 WE-Days over a span of 2 years, and the average expenses was $2,447
per event.
So came to a total of 28 WE-Days over a span of 5 years, specifically speaking on the issue of mental health, from 2016 to 2020, including groups like WE-Day in the United Kingdom, which of course had an impact on the costs. The average expense there was $5,998. Sophie Trudeau came to a total of 7 WE-Days over a span of 3 years, and the average expense was $3,618.
Can you just add those expenses up into totals for each of them?
I certainly don't totally have a calculator in front of me.
Well, to average them, you must have had the total. You need to divide it, the numerator by, you needed a numerator to divide it by a denominator.
We'll not get into numbers on the fly.
Oh,
we'll
of course not, Wayne. I'm sure you don't want to.
We'll not get into, we will ask to provide the totals when they can, shortly after the meeting if necessary.
There's a lot of misinformation and false narratives that are being thrown around. And so I'm going to try to get to some facts because I think Canadians who are listening need to get to those facts. The first thing is we're hearing a lot of $1 billion contract, and it gives the impression that we is getting $1 billion, and that was what the agreement with the government was. Indeed, can you confirm that it was actually a $543 million, like plus $1 million contract? So it was around $543 million contract contribution agreement with the government to deliver the Canada Student Service Grant, with up to $43.5 million going to WE and up to $500 million going to students. Can you confirm that?
Yes, we can confirm that. I'd like to both provide a little bit of context. This is an incredibly helpful piece of context that has been unfortunately misshared. Number one, the first time we heard about the $912 million was when it was announced. We had never been privy to that information before. Secondly, is that the contract is up to, as you said very correctly, the $543 million. Number three, the up to is relevant both to the young people who'd be participating in terms of their volunteer service hours, and also relevant to the organization. This was a contribution agreement based on eligible expenses or eligible expenditures. The organization did not stand to financially benefit from this. It was basically a amount of money we received. Anything we received, we'd have to use for the program, or otherwise be returned to the government. The other misconception here is that it really was up to the $500 million for young people to do service. Based on our modeling, the average young person may have done 100 hours, 200 hours, maximum 300 hours of service. Very few would have received the 500 hours of $5,000. So the true cost of this program would have been in the range likely of $200 to $300 million.
We know that Mr. Morneau wrote up a check to We Charity to reimburse $43,000 worth of expenses. When he appeared last week, that's what he said. Did you receive that check?
Yes, we did. And if I may clarify that was a check to a greater amount than the cost of his trip, but he based it on what one could conceivably have on a trip like that have cost. So I just want to correct a little bit of the public record on that. We Charity did not spend that to host him. but we did receive the check at that value, yes.
Did you bill Mr. Morneau for that amount?
We did bill Mr. Morneau when his office approached us very recently to seek clarification on what the cost of the trip would have been.
À quel moment?
When?
The day prior to his testimony.
La date, est-ce que vous avez la date?
Do you have the date?
Mr. Chair, if you could simply let us know the date of his testimony, or the clerk could, we could then just go back by one date, please.
Okay,
Donc, vous avez facturé la journée où il est venu témoigner?
So you billed him on the day that he came to appear?
The day prior, sir.
What we find out, because the Liberals keep telling us about the great work of We Charity, and I don't doubt that, but We Charity isn't handling this money. It's the We Foundation, which she raised questions about. So you move this money into what is essentially a real estate holding company with no oversight. Don't you figure that Canadians are going to have red flags about, like, I've never heard of a real estate holding company getting upwards of $500 million of taxpayers' money to deliver a program?
Sir, thank you for the question. It was not a real estate holding company. Global News provided that information incorrectly, and we have sought to have that information changed multiple times. If you go back to the source data of the Global News report, they have changed it in the body, but they have not changed it in the title of the headline. It was not a real estate holding company. It was never held any real estate. Sir, no real estate and no assets had ever been placed.
I know there's no assets in there. No assets in there, but Correct. It does say that it is there to provide and maintain facilities to house the operations. Now, come on, boys, men. I'm not a real estate lawyer. I don't know law, but I know you guys got you got multiple corporations, and you have this one that's set up to hold real estate, but it doesn't actually hold anything. Why is that where you decide to put your money? That's the question. There's no accountability mechanisms.
Could we have time for an answer?
I'm really glad you answered the question, because this is actually very much incorrect, and we're really thrilled to be able to set the record straight with you here today. We are. And we'd like to share with you that as part of the conversations with ESDC asked us to assume full liability for up to 40,000 young people who would be volunteering, and accept full liability for those 40,000 young people and all the nonprofits those young people would be volunteering at. So on the advice of professionals working with us.
So are you telling us that it was the federal government's idea to put this through a real estate holding company? Is that what you're saying? Because that's really, really strange.
I want a full answer here if we could.
Who in the government signed off on giving the money, upwards $500 million, to a company, holding company that you have, that's original purpose was to hold your real estate? Come on.
Okay, now we'll come back if we could for a fulsome answer on where the money was held, and then if you know who signed off, you can give that answer as well. But I want to give the gentleman time to answer the question appropriately. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We really appreciate it. Mr. Chair, again, this information that's shared by Global News was incorrect. We want to stress this over again. This is not a real estate holding company, and this is actually a charitable organization that was set up to help limit liability. I'm going to say it again, a charitable organization.
It's got no track record, no assets, never done anything.
Could we hear the answer? You'll have to make a judgment on that following the answer, if you could. Gentlemen, answer.
To set up to help limit liability. The government of Canada asked us to assume massive liability, sir, as part of this initiative for 40,000 young people volunteering during a pandemic. It would have been very difficult for us to put the entire organization at risk under those circumstances. We had this entity previously set up as one to limit liability, and on the advice of professionals, we used that entity.
But it was a board that your board,
Mr. Angus, let them finish the answer, please.
Question, Mr. Chair,
I know, but they haven't finished the answer to your third question ago.
The board raised questions about this.
And
they can explain how this thing.
Charlie, order, Mr. Angus. Gentlemen, answer the question first, and then we'll allow Mr. Angus one final question.
Sir, it was a legal structure that had the ultimate governance embedded within We Charity. It used the We Charity staff and senior resources. It was a contract that was established and signed by ESTC with, by the way, Section 22 holding the provisions on insurance for the government, sir. This was a very well organized system at the advice of all the responsible experts.
So Ms. Margaret Trudeau was paid over $250,000 in speaking fees. Did anyone else get this much money in speaking fees during that same period of time?
Yes, sir. This was something that the practice was in place, not to pay individuals to go on the WeDay stage, to be clear, but for auxiliary events that took place in various cities, often 5-6 events per time, that speakers were brought in. On any given year, a small list was identified to support in these type of auxiliary events, akin to a university lecture series or nonprofit gala fundraisers. Many groups do this, sir.
To be clear, in your previous responses to questions, you did say that members of the Trudeau family were paid to attend WeDay events.
Sir, it was in the premise of WeDay, but the purpose of the speakers and the remuneration of the speakers was specifically for the auxiliary events. Margaret Trudeau came to speak about the issue surrounding mental health. Yes, she spoke on the WeDay stage, but she also provided time to come to the receptions, to have the opportunity to meet with individuals, to sign the books, to do all these additional events. And it was a very significant ask of her time.
Actually, typically for city.
It was a very significant ask of her time.
At those events, how many other speakers were paid?
The vast majority, sir, were done at no cost. It was the small group of speakers who would come, and not just Madame Trudeau, but a small group of speakers would come, again, not just to speak on the WeDay stage. As mentioned, it would be the additional auxiliary events that we needed to support, and specifically on issues that were very relevant.
Sir, I appreciate the part of your question. In essence, if I can answer your question directly by saying it wasn't unusual what was taking place with her. It was a simple process that we had with others.
When your organization booked the Kenya and Ecuador trips, were they booked specifically as an accounts receivable?
So We Charity, similar to many other humanitarian organizations, invites prospective donors, people who vet on behalf of companies and foundations to witness the development projects, what they do.
So the answer to that is no?
Correct.
It was not an accounts receivable.
It
was a complimentary trip, right? That's what your statement said. Is that correct?
Sir, if I can just finish the statement. So it is to host individuals who have an interest to witness our development work on the ground. And to answer your question, it was seen in our mind as a complimentary hosting, given they were already in the country in Kenya and were coming in to simply stay with us in Ecuador to look at this from a development lens.
Thank you. So no accounts receivable. So did you hide to Mr. Morneau the fact that the trip would be complimentary?
The arrangements for the trip were entirely done through an invitation to Ms. McCain and entirely arranged with her and her team. So I don't know whether there was any clarity or conversations that followed. In our mind, it was an invitation to a very prominent Canadian family, Ms. McCain, who's very philanthropic and very beneficial.
I mean, YMCA registers to lobby, the Heart and Stroke Foundation, and they don't get nearly the kind of money that you guys have gotten. So they all register. The lobbying registry is full of charities except your organization. And yet none of them, say, for example, hire the Prime Minister's mother or the Prime Minister's brother, or they have the Prime Minister's wife or Bill Morneau's daughter or fly Bill Morneau. It's the image that you're giving here is that you're getting influence by the kind of power that you have. So when you call, man, they call you. That is lobbying, and you have an obligation, and you are not meeting that obligation.
Okay, we will go to the answer, and that will be it. If you could give the answer, gentlemen.
I will happily stand corrected by our counsel, but based on my understanding, those things that you identified, hiring the adopted daughter of Uganda of an individual, having a mother of an elected official, not an elected official capacity, but as a speaker on mental health, these things I don't believe are actually defined as lobbying.
Well, they're defined under the Conflict of Interest Act as the family of the public office holders that you're lobbying. If you read, I mean, Bill Morneau never read the Conflict of Interest Act. I think you guys should, and maybe the Lobbying Act as well.
Mr. Angus, we're going to allow an answer, and then we're going on to Miss May. An answer, please, gentlemen.
And sir, the proportion prior to this conversation with the government, when the government approached us, with Ms. Morneau approached us with this opportunity, we have received approximately, give or take, $5 million or so from the federal government, to the best of our knowledge, over many years, going back to 2013, based on the information provided to me. But that's a relatively small, very minuscule, under 3% portion of our budget. And
it's
as a
not
result,
the size of the budget.
Mr. Angus, we want an answer. Mr. Angus.
Well, I know, but he's already said that, Chair. We need an answer on the lobbying.
Mr. Angus, they need time to give an answer on the lobbying, and your question round is over. So I'm giving the gentleman time to answer the question, and then we'll go to Ms. May.
Thank you, Chair. We really appreciate it. Mr. Angus, we hear your question. We understand your concern. The answer is that previous up to this point, we've had virtually very limited engagement with the federal government seeking funds. And they, at this point, approached us.
You're hanging with their family. Come on.
Just to correct the record, and I will say, I know both Marc and Craig Kielburger, I've known them for years. I don't say this because I'm angry with you over it, but I do need to correct that you've never asked the Green Party to anything. You've never asked me to be a speaker. And at this point, I don't know whether I really want to thank you for that, but I do want to get to a serious question, though. I was very impressed, of course, with Michelle Douglas. I know her as well, and I'm a huge fan of hers. And I do get concerned with board governance issues. I think you may want to look in the future at what I think was Mr. Barrett raised it earlier, that your role as founders, when you look on the website, you've got founders, you've got staff, and you've got the board of directors, and it's a bit murky as a governance question. But Ms. Douglas told us that there were 3 reasons that she gave for her resignation. And one of them was she couldn't get answers from you, Marc, as to why you went to Kenya twice in a period of time when the organization was in considerable difficulties. Can you explain to the committee, only because she thinks it's highly significant, I need to ask you, why did you go to Kenya twice, and why didn't you give her the information as to why you went?
Of course, Ms. May, thank you. And out of all of this, we appreciate your kind comments that you're getting as well. But very quickly, of course, going back 3 months ago, the world was topsy-turvy. I had a pre-scheduled trip to go to Kenya to help work with your organization. And then a handful of days later, when the pandemic really started to begin very significantly in earnest, when you saw governments closing borders and shutting things down, we had literally dozens of young people on international volunteer trips overseas. We had staff that were literally stuck, Canadian and American staff, that could have been stuck overseas, that some actually ended up being in a very difficult position. We had to get them out. And as the leader, or a leader in the organization, I put my hand up and I said, I need to continue to be of assistance. And even though I just came back, the situation began to rapidly unfold. And I was only back in Kenya for 24 more hours at the request of the team to be of assistance where possible, and to help ensure that the organization would be fine, but most importantly, our people would be fine. And I was doing my very best. They may not have articulated that under the circumstances, a very stressful time, but it was there for our people.
Did you get people out? Were you able to actually get Canadians home as a result of your trying there? I mean, I got a lot of people home to Canada by staying home on Zoom and calling all the right people and calling embassies and high commissions middle of the night. Did you physically have to go there to get people home?
Yeah, Ms. May, as a member of Parliament, you have much more influence probably than we do in these cases. But the team, we had dozens of young people there, very complicated situation. I was there for less than 24 hours. And yes, we were able to get people home.
And if I may clarify, some of the senior team in Kenya were refusing themselves to leave because they were arranging the medical response. We have a hospital there.
I want to come back to the important point that you made about the We Charity Foundation and limited liability. Now, of course, in the event of a program like this, there are considerable liability issues, as you've mentioned. In the event of a significant lawsuit, if the foundation was basically being invested with the liability and didn't have assets, that would substantially increase the risk to the federal government. Did you clearly communicate to ESDC through the process of signing the contract on June 23rd that We Charity Foundation had no assets and would not be able to sustain any significant liability issues?
So here's the good news, sir, that we were very clear, and it was also, I believe, in the contract, if not mistaken, that we had tens of millions of dollars of insurance that we added as course to the foundation to ensure that this whole initiative was protected. And of course, in case of liability, the government and specifically the program and the taxpayers will well protected. So we took that issue very seriously, sir.
But that wasn't my question. My question was, were you very clear in communicating to STC that the contract was being signed with the We Charity Foundation, a company or a foundation that has no assets?
Sir, we didn't have a specific conversation around the monetized, the amount of assets, but they were clear, and yes, ESE was clear that that this was with the We Charity Foundation specifically to help limit liability, sir. And so on the first page of the contract, I'm sure you've seen it. It is in big bold letters, sir. It was a thoughtful conversation we had multiple times with the SDC on this matter.
We are here because of conflict of interest. We have 2 unprecedented investigations into the Prime Minister, into the Finance Minister, into conflict of interest and their relations with you. And so when the board of the chair of the board said she was shocked to learn that the Trudeau family members were being paid and wasn't aware of that, I'm glad that you clarified that they were being paid for the ancillary events afterwards. And that's something I'm really been interested in, because you are bringing major corporate players to the table. And having the Prime Minister's family, the Trudeau name, is enormous. You're providing access to the Trudeau family. Don't you understand or realize that that puts the Prime Minister into a serious conflict by you setting this up and paying the family to do this? Because this is the first part of the question, we have you setting the Prime Minister up by your actions in a conflict, but then we understand after the mass layoffs in March that you pushed out a document to various ministers. That's you lobbying, and yet you're not registered to lobby, and you're very surprised and can't understand how this all, is going wrong for you. The reason we have the lobbying registry is so we can track how groups like yours interact with government. With you going under the radar, we don't have a clue, so we have to trust you. But I think the issue is that because of the issue of conflict, the issue that we have 2 investigations ongoing, possibly a 3rd now with Mr. Morneau, the fact that you didn't bother to register to lobby, and yet you're promoting a project that's going to net hundreds of millions of dollars. I just don't see how guys then as sophisticated as you don't recognize the obligation to follow what every other charity in the country does, to register, to be tracked, so there's accountability. It's the lack of accountability that's really given us a hard time believing you.
I'm happy to answer the 3-part question. Number 1, as to Margaret Trudeau and her speaking, she would come to multiple auxiliary events. If the decision is made by Parliament that the mother of the Prime Minister should not be able to speak to events, we would happily fulfill that. She speaks to multiple charities. We did something many charities do, and frankly, to be very honest, sir, everything my mother tells me to do, I don't do. So I'm not sure if Margaret is going to influence the Prime Minister. Number 1, sir. Number 2,
you were buying the name. Come on,
sir. Mr. Angus, you took about 2 minutes to ask the question. I'm going to give them the time to answer.
Number 2, sir, as for lobbying, we've spoken at this extensively. We're happy to speak further, sir, that based on understanding, it is a calculation on time. That understanding is such that we have looked at that matter. We understand what you're describing. Before April, we have had minimal federal funding and minimal time involved in the procurement.
So you've never reached out for funding before?
Mr. Angus, please.
That's not the appropriate definition of lobbying, sir, and I believe you know that.
Well, I think you would understand it well, too.
Sure. And then number 3, with great respect, is for trust. You trusted us with your own children for years in the program. I hope you trust us now.
I don't trust you anymore, but my children did go through your program, and since my children have been raised, I think it's a very good point. My children learned so much from you guys when you guys were a much younger operation, but I see how many young people feel. I just reading someone who wrote about leaving we, about your disregard, the toxic work environment, the disregard for rights, how we became another private sector company.
Mr. Angus, do you have another question? Point of order from who was it? I didn't see.
Private sector company.
Mr. Sabera, as a point of order. Charlie, there's a point of order. There's a point of order on the floor. Mr. Angus, a point of order on the floor. Mr. Sabera.
Chair, the Deputy Angus was asking a set of questions, then veered off to something that was not relevant to what his question were and what we were discussing today.
That's okay. It's not now. Charlie, go to your questions. Now
well, I think it's just very simple because I think it's my daughters. You guys changed their life, and I think that's fair, and I want to put that on the record. But they talked to a lot of former WE staff, including one who said that we became another private company whose number one aim is money, and I wanted to work at an organization where fear is not used as a tactic to achieve an end.
Okay,
that's what I hear from the young people that my daughters worked with. So I think that should be on the record.
That's your final question.